Thank you for joining us. You are watching Talking Success, the hottest talk show on cable and sweeping the World Wide Web. Today, we got a very, very special show. As you know, a lot of people have been hearing information about reparations and why we should have reparations and why we shouldn't, and there is a claim, there's a debt that needs to be paid. So here in the Chicagoland area, today I have one of the organizers, the key organizer for the ADOS movement here in the Chicago area, American Descendants of Slavery, Marlon Waston. How you doing, brother?
Good, man. How you doing?
I want to thank you for coming on and being with us today, because we were talking earlier, and it appears that people need to be educated about ADOS and about the claim, the injustices. So can you maybe give us a little background on how you got started, how you got involved in the movement?
Yeah, so first, you already mentioned that ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. And what people really need to understand about that is that it's an ethnicity. It's not just simply a club or political organization, which is what ADOSChicago is. ADOSChicago is a political organization, but the term ADOS is the ethnicity of those whose ancestors were enslaved in America.
So you're talking about lineage.
Correct.
We're talking about lineage.
Correct, that's our lineage.
Right.
So you got race, that's blackness, and then you have, when you drill down into that, you have lineage.
So people, if they understood that, then they wouldn't say that the people, the ADOS people, as they try to refer to us, as a very being divisive, and that's not the case, because give the example about how you talked about Black Americans or African Americans.
Well, let me say this first. In terms of being divisive, the thing that gets a lot of Black Americans particularly is emotion. We've, the way, I think maybe it's the way we've been socialized, I'm not sure. But a lot of words trigger us in an emotional way. So when you say divisive, people all automatically, particularly Black Americans, feel that that's some sort of problem. But divisive is division.
Right.
Division doesn't have an emotional value attached to it. It's just a function of math. So you have you have addition, you have subtraction, multiplication, and division.
Right.
Every other group in this country and in the world knows how to use all the functions of math to their benefit. We're at a disadvantage because we don't understand that. We think that there's something wrong with division. Sometimes it may be something wrong with division. Sometimes it may not be. But we just have to determine what it is and understand that it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just something that exists in a mathematical equation, and if you use it properly, it can benefit you. So being divisive at times is good. For instance, on your job or anybody's job, if their employer cuts them a check, they cut it in their name.
Right.
That excludes everybody else.
Right.
In that instance, divisive is good. In a person's home, certain people can come in that live in that house, certain people can't. That excludes and divides everybody else. In that instance, division is good. So when we say, ADOS, we're simply saying that this is our tribe, this is our group, this is our clan, and it excludes everybody else from that group, just like a Nigerian would, just like a Caribbean would, just like an Asian, Chinese person would, or a German or a Polish person. It's the same concept. It's just seen differently when we do it, because people aren't accustomed to seeing us be divisive like that. But again, divisive isn't necessarily bad.
Right.
So.
Right. And then you have, I got Indian in my blood. Now, that may be true. That may be true. But if you go back, now they're celebrating, 400 years?
Right.
Since 1619, right?
Yeah, since the first.
So a lot of things have happened.
Right.
We got a slide we're going to pull up, I think it's slide number 2, that shows, 400 years of racism, and then you got that period of slavery from 1619 up to 1865.
Correct.
Then you got a period of the Black Code of Jim Crow. Then you got the Ku Klux Klan. It just goes on and on and on up
We had slavery, and then we had post-slavery. We had convict leasing,
Right.
and then you had sharecropping, then peonage, then well, before peonage we had Jim Crow, then mass incarceration. So the attacks on ADOS people has just been going on ad nauseum for the past 400 years.
Yeah, it's a system.
It's a system. It's systematic. And and one of the things that can help dismantle that is if we as ADOS people start to recognize who we are as an ethnicity and then start to get on code to attack the system of white supremacy. I don't think that the system of white supremacy is as unpenetrable as we think it is. I think we think that it's a perfect system. It's not. If enough of us get on code and enough of us begin to, and we don't need everybody, but if enough of us begin to recognize who we are, and what I mean by that is our ethnicity, and get on code in that regard, I think we can tackle white supremacy in an effective way.
So let's roll back a little bit. This is 2019. We got a big conference coming up in October. We're going to bring that slide up, number 6, in a minute. This is the first ADOS conference in Louisville in October. How long have you actually been involved? I know last year you had Yvette Carnell, she was in town.
Right.
But prior to that?
So just a little bit of background on myself. I grew up here in Chicago, and I grew up not too far from the mosque, down the street from the mosque. And my father is somewhat of a conscious person. He always preached Black power and being self-determining. So I've always grew up to be an entrepreneur because I was trained like that. But I was also trained to serve Black folk,
right.
serve my people.
Right.
So I saw being an entrepreneur as a means to do that because I just assumed that that's what was lacking in the Black community. Well, over the years, I found, well, not over the years, just a few years ago, I began to read different studies and hear different information from Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore. And what the studies began to show me was starting businesses or being entrepreneurial isn't something that's lacking in Black America. What's lacking is a strong politic. And after a while, after understanding the studies, reading the studies, and watching her show for a while, I made a bit of a hard pivot in my life in that I'm still an entrepreneur, but I no longer use that as a means to serve my people. I now work in the political space to serve my people. So that's what ADOSChicago is. It's an organization designed to serve the political well-being of ADOS people in Chicago. So
right.
That's how I got involved in the movement. I was an entrepreneur. I used to watch people like Boyce Watkins.
Right.
And Yvette Carnell was on this show. And I saw them, and I would watch her from time to time, but politics just wasn't my space, so I didn't, gravitate
right.
to what she was saying. Right. And then at some point, I saw he and her debate. Right. And they basically debated do for self versus being political.
Right.
And the first debate, it was just so compelling. It was just things I had never even considered that it gave me right. some pause. And I saw him debate again, maybe a few months after that. And that was kind of it. That was it. Yeah. And shortly after that, I started to do forums myself because I figured if the information changed me that drastically, it could change other people also. So I started doing forums and eventually was able to get in touch with Yvette. And she came down October of last year and did a keynote for us.
Oh, so you were doing some forums before October last year?
Yeah, I did a few forums before that.
Was it centered around ADOS?
It was the same thing. They were titled The Economic Exclusion of Black People in America.
Okay.
And
the economic exclusion.
Correct, of Black people in America. And it was basically to disseminate the information that I learned from Yvette and Antonio Moore. And again, I was able to get in touch with her a few months after that, and she came down, did a keynote. We had 100-some people show up, and from that point, we've been building this organization called
right.
ADOSChicago.
Right.
So.
And one thing I noticed, somebody's talking about cut the check, the check. But I think what's going to happen is people that's talking about cutting the check, they know some type of injustice is taking place. But I think what they find, I've had some people say, I didn't know, I was saying cut the check, but I understand that based on the information, it's one thing to say cut the check, and somebody said, why should we cut the check? Then when they start getting more information on why there's a disparity with the wealth gap, for example. Going back when Yvette came last October, what was the reaction of the people?
Well, we advertised it for about a week and a half, and it filled up to a stand-only capacity, and
what was
immediately.
I don't want to say the hook, but
Yeah.
what was the title of you did on Facebook, social media?
Yeah, we advertised on Facebook, and she gave us a shout. She gave the forum a shout out on her show.
Okay.
And within a matter of a few days, it was filled to capacity.
A lot of people.
Yeah, like I said, we advertised it for like a week and a half. I didn't know how quick, and how quick it would fill up, and how how powerful this information was, and how many people were, gravitating towards it. But again, in about a week and a half, it filled up. We had 100-something people show up, and it was very interesting because we had Yvette on the panel. She did the keynote,
right,
and then we did the panel. So she was on the panel, as well as a do-for-selfer, which is what we call, folks who suggest that we don't need the government to become a whole community. So they had a bit of a debate, and it was, and the crowd was mostly ADOS, so it was a good time. And then we had a couple of detractors show up, and try to cause a stink, but wasn't no big deal. Wasn't a big deal.
I think you can disagree without being disagreeable.
Some people can, but
some can't.
Some people are just emotionally attached to what they believe, and this is what we're running into a lot, particularly in the social media spaces. A lot of people are emotionally attached to what they believe, so information, facts, and data doesn't mean anything.
But you talked about them being emotionally attached. I would say that you're emotionally attached to the facts.
Correct.
Where some people are just emotionally attached to what they think or feel.
They're emotionally attached to what they already believe.
Right.
And it's not based in facts or data.
Right.
It's just based on what they've come to believe is true.
Right.
And dealing with a lot of folk, especially a lot of our folk, it's hard to break through that, for whatever reason. But that's mostly what we run into when fighting this reparations fight. We run into, obviously we're going to have problems with white people and white supremacy in this fight, but right now we're having the most issues with a lot of our people.
Yeah.
But on the encouraging side, this movement, ADOS, is growing like fast.
Right.
It's growing by leaps and bounds. So we have some detractors, but the rate is growing. I don't think that it's enough distraction to stop what we're doing. I think
see, in the 60s or 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you didn't have the research, the data, the data, and what I call the literature research to support what we suspected.
Yeah.
See, so the times are a little different now. People can't dispute that. And I'm gonna have you do that on the next show because this is like part one.
Right.
But we want to get into redlining and affirmative action. There's two things we want to discuss the next show. So I want to thank you again for tuning in. Don't touch that remote. Don't go over to Facebook or whatever. If you're on the computer, watch this because we're gonna do another part. Time goes real quick. When you're doing these shows. We are in the studios of CAN TV here in the Chicago area, and I'm glad that Mr. Watson came on to give a little brief overview of what's going on with ADOS, and we would like to lead you, if you're interested in getting more information, the website and the ADOS Chicago's Gmail is going to come up on the screen. We're going to leave it up for a few minutes so you can kind of write that down. So you can get in contact with Mr. Watson and the organization here in Chicago. And as I move along, I'm going to mention Yvette Carnell. She's on YouTube every Monday and Wednesday night. And Antonio Moore, he's on Fridays at 9 o'clock Chicago time. Yvette is on Monday and Wednesday at 9 o'clock Chicago time. And Antonio Moore's show is called Tone Talk. So there's the ADOS.org. You go to that, you go straight to the Facebook page. You start following this information, then people have a tendency to get kind of excited because it's not what people believe or feel as much as it's founded on facts.
Yeah. And it's also the passion of converting. It's like being converted from one way of thinking to another. So people get excited and start doing stuff like I'm doing,
Right.
organizing, starting organizations, having forums, starting chapters. So, and this is happening all over the country. And these are just folks who, wanted to get into action and didn't necessarily have a political background.
Right.
But this information just inspired them so much that they understood that this is what our people need, and so they started working. So mostly what you'll find in this movement are people who are mostly givers and people who are servants at heart, people who want to serve, because this information causes them to kind of it caused me to change my whole life, change the trajectory of my life. So again, I'm still an entrepreneur, but I'm more focused on in the political space now, as it relates to serving my people, rather than being an entrepreneur.
I want to go back. We're going to look at slide number 4 when that comes up, and we kind of talk about Antonio Moore with Tone Talks. He's on every Friday at 9 o'clock here in the Chicago area. You can figure it out if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast. But he's an attorney, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And when did you start watching Tone?
As I said, I was turned on to the information by Yvette.
Okay.
And so initially I didn't even know about Antonio Moore.
Right.
But after a few months, she started mentioning him, and that's when I actually started to watch Antonio. But he is an attorney by trade.
Right.
But now he's a bit of an economist in a sense, because he's done a bunch of reports with Sandy Darity.
Right.
Well, he's done a report with Sandy Darity.
Right.
And he's gotten, he works at the highest level as it relates to.
Now, as far as we're going to go to slide number 5 and look at Yvette Carnell. Now, Yvette, you said you got introduced to her
through Boyce Watkins' channel. Yeah.
Through the Boyce Watkins channel, and then she's had her own channel, Breaking Brown, for some time. Again, she comes on every Monday and Wednesday at 9 o'clock here in the Chicago area. And Yvette's got a strong background in politics, right?
Yeah, she worked on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, and she's been a political analyst for most of her life, So, but the sister is heavy, man. She is heavy. She brings the information, straight data, straight facts, and it's just too compelling to ignore.
Right. Man, it's just so much. The information is been so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about again, because people kind of, I know on cable, people kind of surf around, people get distracted, but the conference last October, or you want to call it a conference, or
it was a forum.
A forum last October. Now, some of those same people that came to that forum are actively involved. You've been having meetings, since October at the Woodson Library. It was on Tuesdays.
Yeah, so.
And things change. That's why we want people to go to the ADOS.org, because things change.
Yeah, so initially, right after the forum, again, we had such a good showing that, people were kind of munching at the bit to get to work. But shortly after that, I got involved in the political space. So I started working with campaigns, and things kind of postponed for a while, even though we were still kind of doing conference calls and group meetings and stuff like that. But once the election season was over, I got back into working with the group. And since then, we've been doing weekly conference calls and weekly meetings at different libraries. So, and what we're doing with those meetings, we're organizing on a local level. In fact, we're about to do a citywide survey for ADOS people. It's for Black people, but it'll differentiate between the different ethnic groups of Black people and ADOS people in Chicago, find out what the needs are, find out how we can serve them, and then we'll take that and do something with it in a political space. So the meetings that we have are designed to organize and start localizing ward to ward for ADOS needs specifically. And that's just so people are clear. That's what we focus on. We focus on the political needs of ADOS people, not just black people.
Right.
We're very, very specific.
And there's ways and means, I mean, to determine that. No disrespect to anybody else, but as you said, you got African Americans, Black Americans, correct. And then I think Tone had mentioned that back in 1965, you had like 0.03% of the quote-unquote Black Americans or African Americans were immigrants.
Correct. So
and that population has grown, right?
Well, I think we're about 15% of the nation.
Right.
90+% of that are ADOS people. Probably about 10% are immigrant blacks from Africa or from the Caribbeans or from England, but non-ADOS black people. So, and I want to be clear too, when I say we're advocating specifically for ADOS people, I mean it in the sense that just like you have the Nigerian caucus,
right? We
advocate very specifically. Just like you have the African Immigrant Caucus, we're similar to that. We advocate very specifically. Now, there are maybe times where black people can have a united front, in a sense.
Right.
But when we worry about that when we get to those places, and we don't have a problem with a united front with black people nationwide, citywide, globally. But it's just at certain points things need to be divided, and you need to have certain barriers and boundaries, just like every other group does. It's just we've never had them. So now with this new ethnicity, this new identity, now we have that possibility, and that's what we're doing with ADOSChicago specifically.
Right, right.
So,
right. As I mentioned, the time goes pretty quick. So do you want to kind of recap on anything? Because when you do shows, there's always things you thought about. Yeah. And we are going to do another part too, to talk specifically about the redlining. Spend a little time talking about redlining and affirmative action.
Yeah, and we'll on the next one we'll bring in some other folks, if that's okay.
Right.
That are kind of experts or are really in tune with certain information,
right.
and let them kind of disseminate that information to the public as well.
Right. So moving right along, what do you think about the conference coming up in October?
The conference, Yvette and Tone are doing a conference in Louisville at Pastor Cosby's church, and it's October 4th and 5th, and it's the first ADOS conference in the history of America. So, but unfortunately, it's sold out. It sold out maybe a few weeks after it went live. It's 1,500 people, so it's going to be a pretty big showing. And we, from what I understand, we'll have Marianne Williamson there, who's a presidential candidate who's advocating for reparations for ADOS.
Right.
And they're working on getting other presidential candidates there. So I think the conference is coming up. I think it's going to be a really good place to connect, to build, to share what people have been doing locally in one space. And then after that conference, I think it's going to be just an explosion of ADOS activity that people are going to have to deal with come the 2020 election.
Right, and it's a lot of people that's online. That conference, again, it's on the screen, October 4th to the 5th. You can get more information by tuning in to Yvette Carnell on Mondays and Wednesdays at 9 o'clock on YouTube. And Tone is on YouTube with Tone Talks to get more information. Now, he's supposed to be streaming or something because that's sold out.
Yeah, the conference sold out within a few weeks. I almost missed the tickets, in fact. But they're talking about streaming it. So from what I understand, it will be streamed. And we'll have that information on our Facebook page and our website. And our website will be up within the next few days. Right now, if you go to ADOSChicago.org, it goes directly to our Facebook page. You can join that. You can look for our Facebook fan page as well. Right. We have a Twitter page and Instagram, all the social media sites we have. But so, the conference should be streamed. And as soon as we hear more information on that, we'll put that information out on our social media sites.
Well, it's nothing like being, it's like going to church, that I call it high touch.
Yeah.
Being able to interact with people.
Oh, yeah.
That really helps. Streaming is one thing, but unfortunately, they had no idea. Plus, the facility down there in Louisville only holds so many people.
Yeah, holds about 1,500 people.
So that's the reason why. It's not like it's a mega dome or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm not too sure how effective that would. Sometimes things can get too big.
Yeah, but eventually, I think this thing is going. I don't think this is a flash in the pan. I don't think it's like a Tea Party movement. You know, the Tea Party was an organizing movement, but it was primarily AstroTurf. It wasn't really grassroots.
Right.
This is so grassroots. I mean, the things that people are doing across the country, these aren't things that Yvette and Tone are, you know, instructing people to do.
Right.
They're not funding people to do.
Right.
They're not pulling strings. This is just people who are getting excited about the information and getting to work. So
Right.
it's the grassroots element of it is ridiculous,
Right.
and that's what's going to keep it going for. That's what makes this something that's here to stay,
Right.
and not just some flash in the pan.
Well, we're
movement.
just about out of time.
Oh wow.
Man, I told you it goes
Yeah, it went
quick.
quick, yeah.
So you got enough energy for us to do the
Oh, yeah.
second part.
Oh,
So you know, I want to thank you for tuning in. Hopefully, one thing I like about YouTube is that you can replay this, share it with your friends, redirect them to Yvette Carnell and Tone with Tone Talks. You know, that's like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You got a lot of good information. So right now, the clock is ticking down. So I want to thank you for joining us. You're going to hear the music in a second. I always say here at Talking Success, good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best, and God will do the rest, especially for the ADOS movement. Until next time, have a super fantastic day.